It was one of those late afternoons when the air felt heavy, but calm. The sky was soft and golden, and the quiet hum of cars in the distance mixed with the sound of kids laughing a few blocks away. A teenager walked home, headphones tucked in, bag slung over his shoulder. He had just finished basketball practice and was tired, hungry, and ready for a shower. He wasn't in a rush, though. He liked walking home. It gave him a chance to think. He played the same playlist he always did after practice, something calm that helped him wind down. His hoodie was pulled up because the evening breeze was a bit cool. He wasn't thinking about anything serious, just his upcoming game, maybe what his mom was cooking for dinner. Up ahead, a police car slowed as it passed by. He didn't notice it first. The car turned the corner, circled back, and pulled to the side of the road. Two officers stepped out. One was older, the other looked younger, maybe new to the job. They both watched him for a second before walking toward him. The boy looked up, surprised. He took out one earbud. "Evening, officers," he said politely. "Hey there, son," one of them said. "Mind stopping for a minute?" He nodded and stopped walking. He didn't know what was going on, but he didn't want to seem rude. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. "Basketball practice," he answered. "At the community center." "You live around here?" "Yes, sir," he said. He pointed toward the direction of his street. "Just 2 blocks that way." The officers looked at each other. "You got any ID on you?" The boy hesitated for a second, confused. Yeah," he said, reaching for his backpack. "Hold up," the younger officer said sharply. "Don't move too fast." The boy froze mid-motion, hands still in the air. "It's just in my bag," he said quietly. "My student ID. Why don't you tell us your name first?" The older officer asked. He told them. The younger one repeated it like he was checking it against something. The boy started feeling uneasy. People were walking by now, slowing down to see what was happening. He didn't like being stared at. He wished his mom would call just to distract him. One of the officers spoke again. "We got a call about a break-in at the convenience store nearby," he said. "Suspect's a young black male, dark hoodie, carrying a bag." "That sound familiar to you?" The boy blinked. "No, sir," he said. "I just finished practice. I didn't go near the store." "Mind telling us where you were about 20 minutes ago?" "Still at practice," and he said. "You can call my coach if you want." The younger officer crossed his arms. "You sure about that?" The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." The older one sighed like he didn't want to be there. "Look, just let us see some ID and we'll sort this out, okay?" "Okay," the boy said softly. He started to unzip his bag, moving slowly. His hands shook a little. The younger officer's hand went near his holster and the boy's heart jumped. He froze again. "It's just my wallet," he said. "Then take it out slowly," the officer ordered. The boy obeyed. He held out his wallet with both hands. The older officer took it, checked the card, and looked back at him. "This your picture?" "Yes, sir," he said. "You 16? "Yes." "Where's your mom or dad right now?" "My mom's at work," he said, his voice small. "She's with the government." The older officer raised an eyebrow. "Government, huh?" "Doing what?" "She's an investigator," he said simply. The younger one smirked. "Sure she is," he muttered. The boy heard that. He wanted to defend her, but he stayed quiet. Every time he moved, the younger officer seemed more tense. Cars kept driving by. A couple of people stopped across the street, whispering to each other. Someone took out a phone. The boy felt his throat tighten. He didn't want this to turn into a scene. "Can I call my mom?" he asked finally. The younger officer frowned. "Not yet," he said. "We're still talking to you." "But I didn't do anything," the boy said. His voice cracked slightly, and he hated that it did. "You can check my bag." "We'll decide that," the older one said. He turned to his partner. "Go ahead, check it." The younger officer opened the bag. Inside were sneakers, a water bottle, and a worn basketball. That was it. He dug around a little more, then stood up. "Nothing here," the older officer sighed. "Okay, maybe he's clean, but the description still matches." The boy couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Sir, it's just a hoodie." "Everyone wears hoodies." "Watch your tone," the younger officer snapped. "I'm sorry," the boy said quickly. I don't understand." The older officer looked uncertain now. The younger one wasn't backing down. The boy's hands were still shaking. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. He wished his mom would pick up her phone. Wished she could just appear and make this stop. He decided to try one more time. Please, he said softly, can I just call my mom? The older officer hesitated. All right, go ahead. But keep your phone where I can see it. The boy nodded. He pulled out his phone slowly and dialed her number. His hands were trembling so much he nearly dropped it. She answered on the second ring. Hey baby, I'm just leaving the office. Everything okay? His voice broke a little. Mom, can you come? Please. Her tone changed instantly. What's wrong? He looked at the officers. Cops stopped me. They said I fit a description. There was a pause. Where are you? She asked firmly. He gave her the street name barely above a whisper. She said, stay where you are. Don't say another word. I'm on my way. The boy nodded even though she couldn't see him. He put the phone down slowly. What did she say? The younger officer asked. She's coming, the boy said. Good, the officer replied, like he didn't mind waiting. The older one looked uneasy. Maybe we should call this in, he muttered. Relax, the younger said. We're just talking. The boy stood there quietly. The air felt colder now. Every minute stretched longer. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. A little girl across the street whispered something to her dad, and he gently pulled her away. A few minutes later, another car slowed near the corner. It wasn't a police car. It was a black SUV moving fast but steady. It stopped right behind the patrol car. The officers looked up as the door opened. A woman stepped out, tall and confident, her face calm but serious. She wore a dark blazer and had an air of authority that didn't need words. Ma'am, this is a police scene, the younger officer began. She walked straight toward them. Not anymore, it's not, she said evenly. Her voice was quiet but carried weight. The boy's eyes widened. Mom, stay where you are, baby, she said without looking at him yet. She turned to the officers and held up a badge. Special Agent Denise Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The street went silent. The younger officer froze mid-sentence. The older one blinked, stunned. This your son? The older one asked softly. Yes, she said. And you two have some explaining to do. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness made it worse for them. She looked at her son, standing still, eyes wide, hands shaking. Then she looked back at the officers. Did he resist? No, ma'am, the older one said quietly. Did he threaten you? No. So why, she said slowly, is my son standing here like a suspect? The younger officer swallowed hard. We got a call about a suspect matching his description. Her eyes didn't move. Description, she repeated. You mean a young black male in a hoodie? Neither of them answered. She took a step closer. You're supposed to protect, not assume, she said calmly. Next time you think before you act. Because next time it might not end this quietly. The boy watched her, half relieved, half overwhelmed. She looked at him finally, her expression softening. You okay? He nodded, tears just starting to form at the corners of his eyes. Get in the car, she said gently. He did as told. The crowd stayed silent, watching the whole thing unfold like a scene they'd never forget. One of the officers looked down, embarrassed. The other just stared at the ground. As the SUV drove away, the boy glanced back through the window. The world outside looked the same, but something inside him had changed. He didn't say much on the way home. His mom reached over, squeezed his hand, and said quietly, You did the right thing. He nodded again, staring out at the passing lights. The tension in his chest began to fade, replaced by something else, a mix of relief and pride. He knew what his mom stood for, but tonight he'd seen it for real. The night swallowed the noise behind them. Inside the car, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the tires on the road, and the quiet breathing of two people who had just lived through a moment neither of them would ever forget. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. The boy sat in silence, his hands resting on his knees, still shaken. His mom glanced at him from time to time, but she didn't say much at first. She wanted to give him space to breathe. He looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker past like small flashes of memory he wanted to forget. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful, warm lights glowing inside. It didn't match what either of them felt. He got out slowly, still clutching his backpack even though he knew there was nothing in it but his basketball gear. His mom unlocked the door and motioned him in. Go sit, she said softly. I'll get us something to drink. He nodded and sank into the couch. The house smelled faintly of vanilla candles and home-cooked food. Normally that smell made him feel safe. Tonight it didn't. He heard the clink of glasses from the kitchen and the sound of the fridge opening. When she came back, she handed him a glass of water and sat across from him. She didn't speak right away. She looked tired but composed, the way people look when they've had to hold it together for too long. "Talk to me," she said finally. He shrugged. "There's not much to say." "There's plenty to say," she replied gently. "I need to know what happened before I got there." He looked down at the water glass, tracing a circle on the rim with his finger. "They said I matched a description. Some guy near the store. I told them I was coming from practice, but they didn't listen. I tried to show my ID, but one of them told me not to move. I didn't even know what to do anymore. Every time I tried to talk, it just made things worse." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Did they touch you?" He shook his head. "No, but it felt like they wanted to." The younger one. "He looked like he didn't trust anything I said." She took a slow breath. "You did the right thing. You stayed calm. You didn't argue." He looked up at her. "But it didn't matter. I did everything right and it still happened." That line hung in the air between them. She wanted to tell him it wasn't fair, but he already knew that. "You're right," she said quietly. "It shouldn't have happened. But you being calm might have saved your life tonight." He stared at her, that truth hitting harder than he expected. He hated that she had to say it. He hated that she meant it. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You did everything I taught you. You listened. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't reach for anything too fast. I know it's not right, but those things matter. You stayed in control." He nodded slowly, but his eyes were still distant. "I was scared," he admitted, her voice softened. "I know." There was a long silence after that. The clock ticked softly from across the room. The boy's eyes began to water again, but he wiped them quickly. "I don't want to be scared anymore," he said. She reached out and held his hand. "You won't always be. But tonight, you have every right to be." They sat there for a while without saying another word. Sometimes silence was the only language that made sense. Later, after he went to his room, she stayed in the living room, staring at her phone. She opened the local police department's contact list and scrolled through a few names she recognized. She'd worked with some of them before. She didn't want revenge, she wanted accountability. But more than that, she wanted to make sure her son never had to go through something like this again. The next morning, the story had already started to spread. Someone from the crowd had uploaded a short video online. It showed her arriving, flashing her badge, stepping in between her son and the officers. The caption read, "FBI agent saves her own son from police misunderstanding." By noon, it had hundreds of comments. Some people praised her for staying calm. Others argued about the situation, debating things they didn't even understand. The boy saw it before she did. When she came downstairs, he was already sitting at the table with his phone in his hand. "It's everywhere," he said quietly. She sat beside him and looked at the screen. She didn't like seeing it, but she wasn't surprised. "People share everything," she said. "Especially things that make them feel something." He scrolled through the comments. "Some people are saying the cops were just doing their job." She sighed. "That's what they'll say. But what matters is how they do it. There's a difference between doing your job and doing it right." He nodded, staring at the screen. "Do you think they'll get in trouble?" She thought about it for a moment. "Maybe, maybe not. But they'll have to answer questions. And they'll remember your face." That's something. Later that day, she got a call from the police chief. His tone was cautious, respectful. "Agent Carter, I heard about what happened last night. I just wanted to check in." She kept her voice professional. "I appreciate that, Chief, but this isn't about me, it's about your officers. They made an assumption that could have ended badly. You know that as well as I do." "I do," he said, "and I've already spoken to both of them. There'll be an internal review." "Good," she replied. "I'm not looking to make headlines. I just want them to learn something from this." He promised he'd handle it. She thanked him and hung up, though she wasn't sure she believed it would change much. That evening, her son came into the kitchen while she was cooking dinner. He leaned against the counter, watching her. "Mom, do you ever get tired of fixing things?" She smiled faintly. "All the time." "Then why do you keep doing it?" She paused, stirring the pan slowly. "Because if I stop, the wrong people win." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Can I help?" She handed him a spoon. always. They cooked together in silence the way they sometimes did when words didn't fix anything. It felt almost normal again. Almost. A few days later, a reporter showed up outside their house. A neighbor had probably given her the address. She waited politely at the gate. The agent stepped outside, calm as ever. "Ma'am," the reporter said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but people are calling your story inspiring. Would you like to comment?" She shook her head. "No, thank you." "Do you think this will lead to real change?" "I think it should," she said, "but real change doesn't come from one story. It comes from people choosing to do better every day." The reporter nodded, disappointed but respectful, and left. When she went back inside, her son looked at her curiously. "You didn't want to talk to her?" "No," she said. "I don't need to be on the news. What matters is what happens next." He smiled a little. "You sound like a teacher." "Maybe I am," she said, and ruffled his hair. "You're my best student." That night, the two of them sat on the porch after dinner. The sky was clear, and the stars were scattered like glitter across dark velvet. For the first time in days, the boy looked calm again. "Do you ever wish I didn't have to learn all this?" he asked softly. She looked at him for a long moment. "Every day," she said. "But the world isn't always fair, so we learn how to face it." He leaned his head against the chair, eyes half closed. "I wish they could see me like you do." Her heart ached a little at that. "Maybe one day they will," she said. "And when they do, it'll be because of kids like you who keep showing them who you really are." He didn't reply, but she could tell he was thinking about it. Before they went back inside, she got a message on her phone from the police chief again. This time he was inviting her to a community meeting. He wanted her to share her experience with the officers, to help them understand bias and awareness from a personal point of view. She looked at her son and asked quietly, "Would you want to come with me when I talk to them?" He hesitated. "Me?" "Yes, you," she said with a small smile. "You were the one who lived it." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Okay, but I don't want to yell or anything." She chuckled. "You won't have to. Just tell the truth. That's enough." As they walked inside, she glanced at him and felt a quiet pride settle in her chest. What happened had shaken them both, but it also opened a door, a chance to teach, to change something, even if it was just a little. In the end, she knew it wasn't just about her being an agent or a mother. It was about showing that dignity could still win in a world full of misunderstanding. And for the first time since that night, she felt a little bit of hope. The community meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. The mother looked over her notes one last time as her son waited by the door, dressed neatly in a plain shirt and jeans. He wasn't used to speaking in front of people, but he wanted to be there. When she had asked him a few days earlier if he wanted to join her, he'd said yes without thinking too much. Now that the day had come, his stomach felt tight. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she told him gently while gathering her papers. "I know," he said, "but I want to." They drove in silence for most of the way. The sky was dim, turning shades of orange and purple as the sun lowered behind the buildings. She could see he was nervous, his hands tapping lightly against his knee. She reached over and gave his hand a light squeeze. "Just remember," she said softly, "you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to tell the truth." He nodded, though his chest still felt heavy. When they arrived at the community center, the parking lot was already half full. Cars lined the curb and people were gathering near the doors, chatting quietly. Inside, the room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a small stage with 2 microphones. On one side sat several police officers in uniform. On the other, community members filled the seats, parents, teachers, and students. A man in a gray suit, the police chief, stood near the front talking to a few people. When he saw them enter, he walked over right away. "Agent Carter," he said, his tone polite but cautious. "Thank you for coming. And this must be your son?" "Yes," she said, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "It means a lot that you're both here," the chief continued. "We want to make sure something like this never happens again." She gave him a polite nod. "That's what I'm here for." The boy stayed quiet, looking around the room. He could feel eyes on him, curious, sympathetic, some uncertain. He didn't like the attention, but he knew this mattered. When the meeting started, the chief spoke first. He welcomed everyone, explained that the purpose of the gathering was to rebuild trust and open communication. His voice was steady, rehearsed, but he seemed sincere. After him, a few community leaders spoke about awareness and training. Then it was her turn. She walked up to the microphone, calm as always. Her presence filled the space without effort. She didn't need to raise her voice. She started simply. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I'm not here to criticize or accuse anyone. I'm here as a mother and as someone who works in law enforcement. I know what this job requires, and I respect the weight that comes with it. But I also know what it feels like to fear for your child's safety when that uniform is turned toward them." The room was silent. Even the air seemed to still. "My son," she continued, glancing toward him for a moment, "was stopped last week by 2 officers. They believed he matched the description of a suspect. I don't blame them for following a call, but I do question how they handled it. My son cooperated. He was polite. He was scared, but he listened. Still, he was treated as a threat before anyone even asked who he was." She paused, letting that sit for a moment. A few people nodded quietly in the crowd. "I've worked with police officers for years," she went on. "I've seen courage, compassion, and integrity. But I've also seen fear. Fear that clouds judgment, fear that turns ordinary moments into dangerous ones. What I hope we can all remember is this. Behind every uniform and every badge there are humans. And the same goes for every person you stop on the street. If we forget that, we lose what this job is supposed to be about." Her words were steady but emotional. The chief listened with his hands folded, eyes thoughtful. Some of the officers looked down at the floor. "I don't want special treatment for my son," she said. "I just want fairness. I want understanding. And I want to make sure that no parent ever has to show a badge to prove their child deserves respect." She finished and stepped back. The crowd applauded softly, not out of formality, but because her words hit something deep. Then she looked at her son and nodded slightly. It was his turn if he still wanted it. He hesitated, but when she gave him an encouraging smile, he stood up. His steps were slow, careful. The microphone seemed taller than he remembered. He took a small breath before speaking. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. "I didn't really want to come at first," he said honestly. "But my mom said that if I didn't speak, someone else would speak for me. So I'm here." A few people smiled softly. He glanced at the officers sitting near the front row, then at the rest of the room. "I'm 16, he said. "That night I was just walking home from basketball practice. I wasn't thinking about anything serious. When the officers stopped me, I didn't understand what I did wrong. I tried to answer their questions. I tried to stay calm. But I felt like no matter what I said, it wasn't enough." He looked down for a moment, gathering himself. "I know people make mistakes. I know they were just trying to do their job. But I also know how small it makes you feel when someone looks at you and only sees what they expect to see." His mom watched him proudly. He didn't rush his words. He spoke from a place of honesty, not anger. "I just want people to see me for who I am," he continued, "not for what they're afraid I might be. I'm a student, a teammate, a son. I'm not a suspect because of what I wear or the color of my skin." The room was silent again, the kind of silence that happens when people really listen. "I want to believe," he said quietly, "that things can change. And I think it starts with talking like this, face to face. Because when we talk, we remember we're all people." When he finished, there was a pause before anyone clapped. It wasn't hesitation, it was respect. The chief nodded at him with a small, sincere smile. Afterward, a few officers approached them privately. One of them was the older officer from that night. His posture was stiff, his voice quiet. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "We got caught up in the moment. I should have handled it better." The mother looked him in the eyes and said calmly, "Apology accepted. What matters is what you do next." He nodded slowly, clearly moved. "I understand." The younger officer wasn't there that night, though she suspected he was still processing everything. She hoped this conversation would reach him too. As the room began to clear, people came up to thank them. Neighbors, teachers, even strangers who had seen the video online. Some said the story had made them think differently about what it meant to be fair, to be human. Outside, the evening air was cool again. The boy took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had all week. "That wasn't as bad as I thought," he said with a small smile. His mom smiled back. "You were brave," she said. "That's what people needed to see." They walked toward the car together. Around them, the chatter from the crowd faded into the background. For a moment, everything felt calm again, peaceful in a way it hadn't since that night. As they drove home, he looked out the window. The world outside looked the same, but something in him felt different. He realized that telling his story didn't just help others, it helped him too. He wasn't carrying the same fear anymore. His mom glanced at him. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." She nodded, her hand steady on the steering wheel. "Good, because this isn't the end. This is just the start of something better." He smiled faintly. "You really think so?" "I do," she said. "Because when people listen, things can change. Slowly, maybe. But they can." They drove the rest of the way in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. Peaceful, hopeful, filled with quiet understanding. At home, before going to bed, the boy stopped at his mom's door. "Mom," he said softly. "Thank you for coming that night." She looked up from her papers and smiled. "Always," she said. "That's what moms do." He nodded and started to walk away, then turned back. "And thank you for today, too." She smiled again, this time warmer. "You did more than I ever could, baby. You made them see." He didn't answer, but his heart felt full. As he lay in bed later, the words from the meeting echoed in his mind, not just his own, but his mom's too. You can't protect a community if you don't see its children as your own. He didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time he believed it could be better. And that belief, he thought as his eyes drifted shut, was the beginning of everything. The video from that night spread faster than anyone expected. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. People were commenting from every corner of the country, some shocked, some angry, and many deeply moved. The clip showed everything: a scared teenager, two tense officers, and a calm but firm mother who arrived just in time to stop things from going wrong. In the middle of it all, the teen sat at the kitchen table, still in his gym clothes from the night before. He stared at his phone, scrolling through the comments but not really reading them. His mother sat across from him, a cup of coffee in her hands, her face thoughtful but tired. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. She had barely slept. Even though she was trained to stay calm under pressure, the memory of seeing her son surrounded by police officers haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those flashing lights again, the fear on his face, the confusion in his voice. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, and from reporters, colleagues, friends, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to talk, to get a quote, to turn the story into something bigger. But she wasn't interested in attention. She just wanted her son to feel safe again. He finally looked up at her and asked quietly, "Why did they think I did something wrong, Mom?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at him, his young face, his tired eyes, his hands still trembling slightly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people see what they've been taught to see. It's not fair, but it's real, and that's what we have to change." He nodded, though it didn't make much sense to him yet. He just knew that something had shifted in his world. The trust he once had, that simple belief that adults and police were there to protect him, now felt cracked. Later that morning, the mother received a call from the police chief. He asked her to come in. The department had launched an internal review, and the officers involved had been placed on leave until the investigation was complete. She agreed to meet, not to fight, but to talk. When she arrived at the station, the same building where she had once trained with local law enforcement years ago, the air felt heavier. People looked at her differently, some with respect, some with guilt, some unsure what to say. She met the chief in a quiet conference room. He looked uncomfortable as he spoke. "We messed up," he admitted. "It should have been handled differently." She didn't raise her voice. "It could have ended a lot worse," she said calmly. "If I hadn't shown up when I did, what would have happened?" The chief sighed and nodded. "We're going to review everything. Training, procedures, the way we identify suspects. I promise you that. I hope you mean that," she said. "Because I'm not just a mother in this situation. I'm an officer too. I know how quickly things can go wrong when fear leads instead of judgment." The conversation ended respectfully. The chief thanked her for her professionalism, but she could tell the weight of the incident had shaken the department. Meanwhile, the video continued to circulate online. News channels picked it up. Commentators debated about bias, fear, and accountability. Some praised her for staying composed under pressure, calling her a hero. Others argued about the bigger picture, about what the video represented. At home, the teen didn't care about any of that. He just wanted life to go back to normal. But it didn't. Everywhere he went, people looked at him differently. Some classmates whispered about him in the halls, calling him that kid from the video. Teachers treated him gently as if he might break. Even his friends didn't know how to act. They meant well, but they kept asking questions he didn't want to answer. At night, he had trouble sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flashing lights again. He heard the voice shouting commands. He felt the cold rush of fear that froze him in place. His mother noticed. One night, she sat on the edge of his bed. "You don't have to be brave all the time," she said softly. "It's okay to be scared." He nodded, staring at the ceiling. "It just doesn't feel fair," he whispered. "It's not," she said, "but we can use it to help others. We can make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone else." That idea stuck with him. A few days later, his school invited them both to speak at an assembly about awareness and respect. He didn't want to go at first. He didn't want everyone staring at him. But his mom promised to stand beside him. When the day came, the gym was full. Students, teachers, even parents sat in the bleachers. The principal introduced them and the crowd clapped softly. His mom spoke first, explaining what had happened without anger, just truth. She talked about perception, fear, and understanding, about how quick judgments can cause harm even when no one means for it to happen. Then she looked at her son and handed him the microphone. He hesitated, his hands shaking a little. He looked out at the sea of faces. Familiar, but different now. "I didn't think something like that could happen to me," he said quietly. "I was just walking home. I didn't do anything wrong. But it still happened. And I don't want to be angry. I just want people to think before they act, to see me as a person, not a problem." There was silence for a long moment. Then people started clapping. After that day, something changed. The school started small programs, discussions about fairness, respect, and how to build trust in the community. The teen found a sense of purpose in speaking up. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave the pain meaning. His mother continued her work quietly, avoiding the spotlight even as others tried to pull her into interviews. She didn't want to turn it into a media story. For her, it was about healing and learning, not headlines. But behind the scenes, she met with officers, educators, and community leaders. She helped organize workshops about handling bias and communication under pressure. She wasn't there to attack anyone. She was there to teach. Some officers didn't like it at first. They felt accused, judged. But when they listened to her story, not the badge, not the uniform, but the mother's side of it, they started to see things differently. One officer told her quietly after a session, "I have a son about his age. I can't stop thinking about how close that could have gone wrong." She nodded. "That's why we have to talk about it," she said. "It's not about blame. It's about awareness." At home, the teen began to smile again. Slowly, the fear started to fade. He went back to playing basketball, hanging out with friends, laughing again. But he was different now, more thoughtful, more aware. He noticed things others didn't, small details, small reactions. One evening, as he and his mom sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said quietly, "You think people can really change?" She smiled. "I believe they can," she said, "because I've seen it. But it takes time, and people like you, brave enough to speak, make that possible." He leaned his head back, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. "I didn't feel brave," he admitted. "Real bravery," she said gently, "isn't about feeling fearless. It's about standing up even when you're scared." The air was calm. Birds flew overhead, and somewhere in the distance children laughed. Life was moving forward again. That night, as the city lights flickered on, the mother scrolled through a few new messages on her phone. Not from reporters, but from parents thanking her. Parents who said the video made them talk to their kids differently, think differently. She put the phone down, looked at her son asleep on the couch, and felt a quiet kind of peace. What had begun as a terrifying night had turned into something bigger, not just a story of fear, but one of growth, understanding, and the courage to make change. The world was still imperfect, but for the first time in a long while, she believed things could get better, and that belief, fragile but real, was enough to keep her going. Weeks passed after the community meeting, and life slowly settled back into a quiet rhythm for the mother and her son. The incident that had once felt like it would define everything about their lives had begun to take on a different meaning. It was no longer just a frightening night. It had become a lesson, a conversation starter, and a small but real spark of change. The teen was back in his routine: school, basketball practice, homework, but he carried a new awareness with him. He noticed how people reacted differently now, how some officers greeted him with cautious respect rather than suspicion. He still felt a little tension when he passed police cars, but the fear was fading, replaced by a sense of understanding. He had seen firsthand how one calm voice, one steady presence, could change the course of a situation. At home, the mother continued her work quietly. She had organized a series of workshops for local officers, focusing on communication, awareness, and empathy. She didn't want to shame anyone. She wanted to teach. She wanted to show that mistakes could be corrected without anger, and that listening was more powerful than shouting. One evening, after a long day, she found her son sitting on the porch, notebook in hand. He had started writing about the incident, trying to capture what he felt and what he had learned. "I'm writing a story," he said softly. "Not for anyone else, just for me." She sat beside him, curious. "What do you want to say?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "I just want to remember how scared I was, and how strong you were." She reached over and ruffled his hair gently. "You were strong too," she said. "You stayed calm when you had every reason to panic. That's bravery, even if it didn't feel like it." He smiled faintly, feeling some of the weight lift from his chest. "I guess I never thought about it like that." Together they sat quietly for a while, the sky above turning dark, stars just starting to appear. The world felt peaceful in that moment, even though the memory of that night was still fresh. A few days later, the mother received a call from a neighboring school district. They had heard about her workshops and the community meeting, and they wanted her to speak to students and officers there. She accepted, seeing it as another chance to make a difference. She and her son drove together to the new school, the teen fidgeting nervously in the passenger seat. "I don't know if I can do it again," he said. "You can," she told him firmly. "You know the truth, and that's all you need." When they arrived, the auditorium was packed. Students, parents, and police officers filled the seats. The mother began speaking first, sharing the story of what had happened to her son, how quickly assumptions had escalated, and how important it was to treat everyone with respect and patience. Her words were calm, but each one carried weight. Then she gestured to her son. "And this is the young man who lived it," she said. He stepped forward, taking a deep breath before speaking. At first, his voice was shaky, but as he continued, it grew stronger. "I want people to understand that when someone looks at you and assumes you're dangerous, it changes you. You feel small, powerless. You don't know what to do. But you can't let that fear take over completely. You have to stay calm and try to explain yourself. And you have to hope that someone will listen." The room was silent as he spoke. Some students were nodding. A few officers shifted in their seats, realizing how close the situation could have gone to disaster. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did that night," he continued. "I want people to see each other as humans first, before anything else. That's all I'm asking." When he finished, the applause was louder this time, not because it was a performance, but because the audience recognized truth and courage. Afterward, people came up to them. Some students thanked the boy for speaking, telling him how it made them think differently about fear and assumptions. A few officers approached and quietly admitted that they had learned something valuable from listening to him. At home that night, the teen lay in bed reflecting on the day. "Mom," he said softly, "I think people really are starting to understand." She smiled from the doorway. "It's a start," she said. "It's never instant, but it matters that it begins somewhere." Over the next few months, small changes began to ripple outward. The local police department adjusted its training programs. Officers practiced de-escalation techniques and communication strategies. They held more community meetings and started listening more to the perspectives of young people in the neighborhood. The teen noticed these changes as he walked through his community. He saw the same officers from that night smile at him, greet him politely, even ask about his basketball games. These interactions were small, but they mattered. They reminded him that change wasn't just a concept. It was real, tangible, and ongoing.